Good morning, everybody. Welcome into this week's long-form episode of Mining Stock Daily. I am Trevor Hall, your host once again. This is taking you into your last day of trading and into a long weekend with the Beaver Creek Precious Metals Summit underway next week, and then following that, the Denver Gold Forum. And then that's basically halfway through September. So we're going to keep talking about exploration, mineral exploration with Marley Palin. She is the person from BHP Explore. That's an accelerator program launched by mining giant BHP and designed to support and expedite the discovery of critical minerals essential to the global energy transition and beyond. That does provide a little bit of a stipend to these companies within these cohorts the last couple of years. So we talk about that and really kind of its position it has seen itself in the last number of years while markets were, capital is really hard to come by for a lot of these explorers. So great long conversation about the Explore program with my guest, Marley Palin. Special thank you to Vizsla Silver, Revival Gold, Integra Resources, and Equinox Gold for their continued support of Mining Stock Daily. We got a full boat of interviews lined up for next week from Beaver Creek, so we will be airing those as best as we can throughout next week and the following, so lots coming your way. But let's jump into this conversation with Marley Palin of BHP Explore. All right, Marley Palin of BHP, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Mining Stock Daily.
Thanks, Trevor. Looking forward to catching up today.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun conversation. I have a long list of questions for you. But before we kind of get into the BHP Explore program, how it's evolved over the last couple of years since its original launch, I'd love to hear more from you because your background, it appears, not necessarily mining, but really on leadership and innovation. So can you walk me through how you landed in this crazy, wonderful sector?
I think my team regularly asks, "How did you end up here and why?" I've had such a fun little route to BHP and the BHP Explore program. As you said, my career has been in innovation and tech, and I've had the pleasure of being able to sort of sit in a whole bunch of different roles in that ecosystem, from research centers to university incubators, corporate VC, internal innovation teams, the likes of Coca-Cola, etc. So innovation is definitely my shtick. And I got introduced to the wonderful BHP team when they were looking to design and create the Explore program. They had a phenomenal internal team that knew the ins and outs of exploration really well. And they were looking for some support on what does a great accelerator look like. So that's how I stumbled into BHP, and then I've had the privilege of, a number of different leadership and head of roles in the team, and still get to be a part of the wonderful Explore program 4 years on.
When I was starting in this industry, one of my first kind of gigs, I guess, was I was working with the hackathon with Barrick back in the day, and they were really like pushing innovative technologies to help find ways to improve their business. And I mean, that was about 2017, I think it was. Those kind of initiatives kind of went by the wayside during COVID, unfortunately, but then slowly started picking up. But there's some vast differences between, what Barrick was doing almost 10 years ago to what BHP is doing now. But there are some, similarities as well. And I think you mentioned it, like the BHP Explore program is designed to support early stage explorations, but it takes that accelerator program and kind of puts that venture capital type of twist into it to a point. It's program, 6-month tailored experience, boot camps, workshops, coaching, all these things. Can you kind of walk us through the trials and tribulations of taking that venture capital style approach to an industry that's been around for forever?
Yeah, it's funny. One of my favorite stories was first year of the Explore program. It was very much a case of we were, taking off whilst building the plane. And so we launched applications and we were in sort of the final round of applications, which is interview week. And we hadn't really designed the program yet. We were very much waiting to see what did the first cohort look like and then how could we design an experience around them. And I remember finishing interview week year one and just saying to the team, I do not know how I'm going to design a program around this. It was my first exposure into exploration, into the technical depths of geology. I couldn't even spell porphyry, not to mention know what a porphyry was at that stage. And so it was then, diving into, and it was about December of year one, diving into designing what this accelerator program looked like. But a couple of years on now, I can firmly say that the Explore program takes so much of the basic building blocks of an accelerator in every other industry. There's nuances, of course. This industry is, particularly risk averse, and in some ways it needs to be. At BHP, safety is our number one priority. And so compared to other accelerator programs that I've designed and built, it really needed to have risk and safety as a huge foundational pillar. And so that was a really interesting, different element. What you can do in a particular time frame in an exploration project is different to what a startup can do over 3 to 6 months. A startup can completely pivot their business model, rebuild their front end and back end tech stack in a couple of months. But in exploration world, some of our teams are locked out of their projects for seasonality for months. They're waiting for permits. They're waiting for the right contractors to be available. So there's a lot of nuances in what you can actually get done in an accelerator program. And every year we've refined Explore a little bit more based on what we've learnt. BHP
Mhm.
has also learnt a lot. We're the world's biggest mining company. It's not easy doing something new, innovative, quick, agile in a company the size of BHP. And, I regularly get asked, how do I spend my own time? And I would probably say a good 30 to 40% of it is not actually with the cohort. It's on the internal mechanisms to make sure that we're bringing the best of BHP to the table, that we're not slowing down these juniors, that we're actually accelerating in the nature of the program versus adding the big bad bureaucracy that you can sometimes get from a major into the universe of these junior companies. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride. I would say Explore very similar to a typical tech accelerator program, but we've really tried to customize it to make it fit for purpose for exploration.
Yeah. You mentioned safety. What other core elements do you find are crucial to retain and continue to maybe even modify to make this program successful? I mean, the 2023 is your first cohort. Is that correct?
2023 is our first cohort.
Okay.
So we've had 3 cohorts so far. Next year is
Yeah.
our fourth cohort. The program and the curriculum that we've designed is really against 3 different pillars. The first one is business, and we spend a lot of time with the juniors on their business strategy. What is their business model? What's their strategy? How do they set up a long-term sustainable strategy that goes beyond the next 6 months of funding? And so a lot of the time is spent actually going, are you a sustainable, investable company, regardless of whether BHP is the investor or someone else? And so there's a lot of time spent on a lot of the business foundations, their operating model, their structure, their board composition, their decision-making frameworks, helping them do those really early sort of startup setting up of a business. The second pillar of the program is technical. And this is where we try to bring every piece of, BHP excellence that we can to the table. They're paired with technical sponsors. They have a technical coach. We give them access to data sets that we may have, our mineral systems frameworks, exposure to the latest geophysics techniques, geochem techniques, insights into what we've done in these regions previously and what's worked and what hasn't worked. And so it's very much trying to throw the full book of technical expertise at them. And Explore, ultimately it's BHP. So we're looking for a BHP scale opportunity. And so
Mhm.
what we find is that actually getting the cohort members and the juniors exposure to what does an opportunity, the scale that BHP needs to see actually look like is really useful. And then the
I,
last one is, oh, sorry.
no, no, I don't. I didn't mean to interrupt. I do want to hit on the scale, but if we, can I go back and I want to ask you about the
Yeah.
business aspect of this program because exploration, well, you can make the argument it's not a business, right? It's almost a science, a little bit of an art. There is no cash flow until rock starts going through the mill and starts creating a product that's saleable, right? So, what's on the business side of this? Are you spending more time talking about kind of managing equities on the marketing side, being able to finance when need to, how to manage the cash on hand? Can you kind of break that down a little bit more? Like what part of this, not so much business, more of management of an equity is BHP bringing to the table for these cohorts?
Yeah, great question. And so the business part of our program, I guess it starts by working with them to really define what's the kind of company they want to be. And so, what does that business model look like? Are they a project generator for a major? Are they, a business that wants to take, things to development or beyond? Are they a royalty in nature? What type of asset are they looking for? Are they multi-commodity, single commodity? Do they play in a particular region or are they region agnostic? And so we spend a lot of time with them going, who are you and what do you want to be? And how do you make some intentional choices on that instead of being reactive to the market? Then we do a fair bit of work on scenarios to say, okay, if that's who you want to be, what do the different scenarios look like? If this project is successful, if this project is not successful, if you have a follow-on partnership with BHP, if you don't, and actually help them solve for or plan for the different scenarios that may exist. One of the common things that we hear and we see in Explore and very reasonably from a lot of the juniors or the smaller players is going, well, I don't know yet. It depends if I can raise at the end of the year, or it depends what happens with this particular project. And we find it's really reactive instead of proactive. And so we spend a lot of time on business strategy and going, you can plan for this. You can set up multiple scenarios, multiple options. So when these different paths do eventuate, you know what you're going to do, you know how you're going to respond, you know where you're going to focus next. Then once they've got that, we do spend a fair bit of time with them on, well, what does their funding mechanism look like? A lot of our companies are public, some are private. How are they actually structuring themselves to be successful? Do they want to go public at some point? Do they not? If they have multiple projects, what are the end goals for those projects? Where are they looking for a strategic? Where do they not need a strategic? Where do they need to bring on financing versus where do they want to progress it, perhaps alone in the current funds that they have? So there's a lot of work with them on actual funding mechanisms. How do they fund? And then we spend a fair bit of time on investor relations. So what does their investor
Mm.
relations look like? And I think there's a really common misconception that that's only for the public companies. But we find for the private, that's equally, if not more important, because they've often got a couple of key investors on their cap table, and doing proactive management of those is really critical to the success. So there's a lot in that investor relations part towards the end of the program.
So I know you mentioned scale, and that's obviously a big part of the criteria for this program. World class minds. That's what everybody's looking for. Investors like myself, we want to have capital in that next tier one potential discovery, right? Could you elaborate on how BHP defines and evaluates that potential for scale in these early exploration type companies, especially given the diverse geological context and the commodities that are, prevalent within each cohort?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know this as well as us, that there is no magic sticker that says BHP scale, not BHP scale. And again, one of the most common questions that I get asked is, what's the number? What is the
Yeah.
production number or what is the total? And the answer is there isn't a golden number. It needs to be big. But for us, big does look different in jurisdictions. If you've got, an opportunity in an Australia, a Canada, a US, a Chile, Colombia, Peru, a jurisdiction that we're already operating in, that we know, that we have infrastructure in, we can be a little bit permissive to those perhaps smaller sides of the opportunities. But if you've got an opportunity that's in a new jurisdiction for us, amazing. That's really exciting. And that's a lot of the opportunities that we bring into Explore. But we really need to see from day one that it has the potential to be of BHP scale, by million tons at some point, in order for it to be worth that sort of risk value equation for us. In terms of how we assess that, Explore is really big, and you'll hear and see this in everything that we say. Mineral systems is the foundation of our technical program. And so what we're looking for in, the early stages of applications is there evidence or, systems observation, systems evidence that you could have a large system here or multiple systems? And are we seeing some analogies to other world-class systems in the world? So we know that we're not going to have, a BHP scale opportunity all defined sitting there in an Explore application ready for us, but we want to see some of those early indications that we think that there's a world-class mineral system here.
Yeah. I think it's probably important to note that a number of the companies within the last few cohorts I've been involved in as an investor. You've brought on some really great teams in there, just transparently Scout Resources, or Scout Discoveries, Palace Resources, friends of mine, watching them do excellent work and being involved with the Explore program has been a real net positive. I think other friends of the podcast, the Equivest, Joanna's just one of the top notch. I think so highly of her, just incredible.
Phenomenal.
Critical thinker, explorer, all those things. So, it seems like it's almost incredibly competitive. Is there a competitive nature to the Explore program? Like, are they trying to go out there and maybe one up everybody, or how collaborative does this whole thing get?
Yeah. So before I answer the competitive, because that's a really good question, I think it's important to note, obviously we're looking for good projects, but from what you just rattled off there, what matters just as much, if not more to us, is good teams. And so I often say to those applicants that get to the final round of Explore interviews that if you're at the final round, we think the project's cool. We want to know if you are a team that we want to work with. And we pride ourselves in bringing into the program some of the best explorers that we think exist out there globally. Awesome teams, great people, companies, partnerships that we want to invest in. And, the reality is often a project isn't a great fit for our portfolio. Some really good examples of that were Palace at the time. Asian Battery Minerals has gone on to do amazing things in the nickel space in Mongolia. There have been some amazing teams, excellent projects that just weren't a fit for BHP at that time, but they were relationships and individuals that we really backed. And, if they weren't going to go on and do great things with us, it's great that they were going to go on and do great things with others. And so we really look for strong teams that have the capability. And if it's not this opportunity, hopefully we build the relationship through Explore that when they find another awesome project a couple of years down the track, we're the first people that they bring it to. In terms of the cohort, there is no competition, and it's really intentional in that way. I think one of the most magic things about Explore is the cohort and the community that it creates. You end up, and we see it every year, and every year we go, oh, it can't be as good as last year, but you bring this beautiful bunch of people together that are incredible explorers, great thinkers, that are all driven, passionate, and are trying to do the same thing, and they naturally become such a close bonded cohort. There's no magic number that we do or don't invest in. If I have 8 projects at the end of the cohort that are investable, we'll invest in all 8 of them. If we have none, we'll invest in none of them. And so with the cohort, there's no competition. There's huge collaboration. In previous years, they've shared resources, data sets. They've co-invested in contractors. They still call each other up and go like, hey, we've got this problem or we're tackling this. How can you help? So it's designed to be super collaborative in the cohort, not at all competitive. And I think that's part of the magic. You end up with 20 absolute legends that are friends for life every year.
Well, it's so interesting because, we're about ready to enter into the Beaver Creek Precious Metal Summit. I think is one of the preeminent events for explorers and capital markets in the world. I just think it's I think it's the best, arguably. Um, but it's also one of those things, and at least in the last number of years, where capital has been very hard to acquire. Is you'd put 100 of these companies, and if they can get in the room with a major producer such as a BHP or your peers, you know they have to put on their sales hat. They have to sell the stock. They have to sell the story. And if they, even if signing like a non-disclosure agreement, they can use that and say, send to their market communication, say, well, we've signed an NDA with a major, and they're also pushing the stock that way, and so it's it's interesting because from my standpoint is we've been trying to sell equity to the same group of people. We've been trading amongst ourselves. Now you bring
Yeah.
in BHP, and 8 to however many people are in the cohort, and it doesn't seem like it's that way. Like these companies are trying to sell their project to BHP. It's really a collaborative effort on the takeaways of how BHP has become so successful through markets, through innovation, through the technicals of mining, and taking those lessons and giving it to them so they can go out and do the best they can with or without BHP as on their side.
Yeah, and I think that, the program's designed on partnership. We certainly don't know everything there is to know about exploration, and I wouldn't be using, our playbook as the golden playbook. The program is definitely not about telling explorers how to explore how BHP explores. It's about going, okay, there's some things that the juniors are amazing at. Their ability to move quickly, think agilely, owner's mindset, pivot, go to places that we can't go as BHP. But, they're cash poor, they're often resource poor. And so it's about going, all right, well, can we take the great parts of a major, our capital, often our technical depth, our deep data sets, and partner that with the agility, the entrepreneurialism, the pizzazz of a junior, and get things done quicker, get outcomes faster, evaluate projects faster. And so, yeah, I think the magic of that partnership really works. And we say to the cohort companies, the idea of the equity free is that you get 6 months to take a breather. Like, we know that 500K USD is not going to get you a full drilling program in today's market. You'll be lucky in some countries if it gets you one drill hole. But what it does do is give you and your team 6 months to stop, take a breath, not need to sell the story, not need to release the press release, and just take some time to do a step back understanding of your project with, a really strong technical team on our side, and go, okay, what are we looking for here? Do we have the right bones? Do we actually think that we're progressing this in the right way? The way that makes sense to find a tier 1 discovery, not the way that is going to get that next drill hole result to tell the next press release story to jump back on the hamster wheel. So it's designed to give the companies a little bit of a breather from that market chase to do the right work, not the work that the market's demanding.
How have the last few cohorts adopted new technologies within these programs? And obviously, artificial intelligence, it's the headline everywhere. But in exploration, it really has been uh, a widely adopted tool, I would say, the last 2 years. So what other like commitments or other ideas with innovation are you seeing within last couple of years of Explore to kind of bring to the table that maybe even be an aha moment for, for BHP itself?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do every year as part of the program is called Toolkit Camp. And in previous years, it's been on the back of PDAC. And the purpose of that is to really expose the cohort and ourselves as the BHP exploration team to some of the latest and greatest technologies. So whether that's, geophysics advancements that players like Fleet are investing in, whether it's new geochem techniques that we haven't played with before, whether it's more effective downhole drilling techniques, a range of different things. And then obviously, over the last couple of years, 2 years, I would say in particular, the AI boom, there's a lot of skepticism in that space. And I think what we're seeing, as the BHP exploration team and in my other hat, as head of innovation for BHP, there's some things that are really effective use of AI and some things that are just a nice billboard talking about some interesting pieces. Where we've seen real success is in where you combine mineral systems and machine learning. And I don't use AI intentionally because I think every time we see AI used at the moment, all it is sophisticated machine learning most of the time. Um, but there's a lot of underutilization in that space. And, most recently we took this year's cohort to Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, and they spent a little bit of time with the Minerals X team out of Stanford. And they're doing some really interesting things in the machine learning data space. Equivest is another great example of that. Obviously, we brought them into the program a couple of years ago, and they were the only really people that we saw on the market that were doing AI ML driven scale reduction in exploration and doing it really well. And so we brought them into the program. We now use them as an exclusive service provider. A number of our current cohort are using them. We found them as an incredible partner in this space and properly frontier. And then, to be honest, Trevor, that's what I'm looking for next year. I've been meeting with a number of people over the last couple of weeks, and I've said I want the next Equivest. I want to see who else is doing really cool things in the Venn diagram of exploration, technology, AI, ML, because I think there's a lot that we as BHP can learn from that space, and I think a mechanism like Explore can get some really cool proof of concepts out really quickly in that area.
So it's an equal amount of disruption, not only for companies coming into the cohort, but also potentially for BHP as well. That's very cool. These programs are only 6 months long, Marley. So it's a blink of an eye in exploration years, right? Because exploration can last decades, depending on if you want the scale, right? So how does Explore really balance the commitment with inherit the uncertainties and timelines of exploration? And what are the key indicator milestones during that 6 month program that maybe de-risk a project's viability to be, a BHP stake in their portfolio itself?
Yeah. So when the applicants come to interview week, a big part of interview week on our side as BHP is really thinking about, okay, what would we want to see in the program to make this investable to us at the end of the program? And do we think we can de-risk this within that 6 to 12 month window sufficiently for us to make that next financial commitment? Then in January every year, we bring them to boot camp. Next year, it's in sunny Cape Town, on the back of or just before Indaba. And we spend a lot of time with them during boot camp on their work program. So what's their current status of their project? What are their critical uncertainties? And what can we do to de-risk that over the 6 to 9 month program? They then co-design a work program with us. Some of them can get done within the 6 months. A number of them can't. And so we adjust the length of the program to suit the project. If there's seasonality and they can't actually, access their ground until the summer season in the Northern Hemisphere, then we'll adjust the program duration. If they're waiting for data back, if they need, fertility results back that are going to take a longer period, we adjust the program duration. And then as the program sort of is progressing, they meet with our technical team every fortnight. So where are we at? What are we seeing? What does that look like? As different decision points come up in their work program, we pull different people in. So when they're selecting, geophysics providers, we'll pull in some of our geophysicists that will actually make sure they're using the right methodology, right survey design, that sort of thing. When they get results back, we'll pull in a different set of people to go, okay, what are we seeing here? What does that mean we want to do next? So they have very regular touch points throughout their work program. And we're really upfront, and anybody a number of the cohort, and so they can speak to that. We're really big on not playing games in Explore. It's a lot of fun, but we don't mess around with juniors' time because we know that time and money is really precious. And so the second that we're seeing results that tells us, okay, maybe this is not for BHP or it is for BHP, we're really upfront with that and tell them really early. And so already, in the current program, there are some projects that I'm like, yep, we're loving this. Let's start talking what deals look like. And some projects that I'm like, the results are telling us that this is probably not a fit for BHP right now. What are you guys pivoting on to next? And how do we help you? with that. And so we're really upfront, but every program, or rather every project, has got a custom work program and therefore a custom program duration that's fit for that specific project.
What has the program been, or what kind of success has this program been due to the market volatility? 2023, 2024 markets weren't great, especially for explorers. Capital is really hard to come by, right? You launched this program. There's been 2 or 3 cohorts.
Mm-hmm.
You provide, and you can make the argument that the cohorts came in when times when markets were tough, exploration was tough, capital was hard to come by. You give them 6 months of this, training by the best, by BHP, biggest miner in the world, or one of the biggest miners, depending on what kind of metrics you're looking at. And you provide them, a $500,000 stipend for the program. That obviously you could look at that as an investor. You'd be like, oh, this is good news because the market sucks.
Yeah.
And now this company I'm involved in, or I have capital in, is getting picked up by BHP. They're going to learn from them, get some non-dilutive capital, take away from that, and it should set them up. But because of the market, where the markets were in the last 3 years, you can maybe potentially make the argument that this program kind of filled a little bit of a void. But now the markets, whether it's talking critical minerals or even precious metals, is like completely different. There's money flying off of shelves into these companies. Exploration financing is just alive and well right now. Is there a competitive nature? Now you're asking people like, well, the metals prices are raging. Critical minerals are part of that. Why would I want my company to take 6 months away to go do work with BHP when they could stick on the ground, do a lot of hard work, and raise arguably 4 or 5 times the amount of money than what BHP is willing to give them in the stipend? So is there I just turned on my light. Is there market competitiveness with the program now, given that it's much more dynamic than it was over the last couple of years?
Yeah, definitely. But I think for us, that's only driving excitement. We see it's a classic, rising tide lifts all ships. And so we want to be seeing more investment, a reactivation of the market, because ultimately that starts generating more projects, which could become interesting to us, either through Explore or our other means as exploration. So definitely a more competitive space. What I would say is that the projects that have been successful in getting into Explore and the projects that we've been invested in afterwards are definitely not cash-strapped companies that were just desperate for the 500. They had other funding mechanisms, but ultimately wanted a strategic partnership with the likes of BHP. And so, if you're only coming in to Explore for the 500K, then I'd say still apply because you might have something interesting. But at the end of the day, that's not necessarily, the long-term why behind Explore. I think you've really got to want to build a long-term strategic partnership with a major. And I love, Trevor, I love being able to speak about Explore this year, because speaking about it in year 1 and even year 2, there was so much skepticism in the market. They were like, what does BHP know about exploring? 500K free money feels a little bit too good to be true. There was a lot of skepticism. But, now 4 years in, we're sitting on about a 50% conversion rate. I can sit here and say we put our money where our mouth is. We don't bring you into the program dilly-dally for 6 months. We bring you in, we throw everything we can at accelerating your opportunity. We tell you very quickly if we think it's a fit for you. And then for 50% of those companies, that converted to, a follow-on investment from BHP, a long-term partnership with us. So yes, there are definitely other ways, and it's great to see the market reactivating and different capital sources coming back online. But I think if you want a fast-tracked partnership to a major, then this has got to be one of the best options out there at the moment.
Well, I think everybody really would like to know who your favorite companies were in the cohort from 2025 then.
It's one of my one of my dear cohort members from Scout Discoveries this year always asks me, he goes, do you have a point system? How do I know if we're the favorite? It's so funny because my favorites, are different from every year. Year one, we had James Mungle, who is a professor from Carleton University, who came in to explore with like an idea, and that was it. No company set up. We said to him that, Jim, you're actually going to have to incorporate a company if we're going to pay you. And so, that's a really early stage idea, down to Kingsrose in year one, who was really cashed up at the time, definitely didn't need the 500K, but saw huge opportunity in a long-term partnership with BHP. And, Andrew and Fabian have become awesome friends. Every year, the relationships that we build are amazing. And as I said to you, some of the best relationships are the ones that we haven't invested in. The ABM team, I follow them so closely, every press release, everything that Garner and the team release, because we're such fans of that team, such advocates of their project. It just wasn't a good fit for the portfolio right now. So that was my way of completely dodging around who's my favorite for this year. You'll have to wait and see for a couple of press releases when we've got investment news later in the year.
Okay, well, we will wait patiently because that's just the name of the game for us. Well, let's talk about 2026. So you're accepting applications now, correct?
Next week, they open on Monday.
Week. Okay. So I assume a lot of the conversations you'll be having here in Colorado will be based on that application process. You'll be quite busy, I'm sure. But I'm actually quite curious about maybe internal conversations with Explore about, given the different dynamics of the market. Obviously, we have a precious metals market that's absolutely raging as we speak, but there's a lot more emphasis on resupplying of critical minerals, rare earths. Do you tweak kind of the criteria for the next cohort based on current market dynamics? Knowing BHP has to look 20, 30, 40 years into the future, and where they need to be as those markets shift and the cycles shift. How does that play a part into the companies that you are potentially going to bring in for the next cohort?
Yeah, it's a bit of a yes and no. So the magic of Explore is that we put this wide net out and we get a really great insight into the projects that are out there that we didn't know about or weren't on our radar. So we really intentionally do no filter. And over the last 3 years, we've brought in projects that were definitely off strategy, so to speak, or weren't something that we were actively looking for, just because they were awesome projects, great teams that landed on the radar. And Explore is our chance for BHP to do things we wouldn't do otherwise, to try things, to play in jurisdictions we wouldn't otherwise go into. So we from the outset do wide application, any jurisdiction, any commodity, a traditional exploration project, a technology bent, a new way of doing exploration. We want to see it and hear it. And we don't filter early in the application process. We evaluate applications on a rolling basis. So they open next week. The sooner you get them in, the sooner we hear about them. We'll get back to you on them. And then we very much do the first set of screening completely open to just what projects look interesting where in the world. When we get down to the final set of screening where we're deciding the cohort, that's where I definitely bring in a lens of BHP's sort of strategy. So where are the areas in the world that we're particularly interested in learning more in? And so a great example of that was, last year, where you would have seen we had a clear interest in Kazakhstan, in bringing a couple of companies into Kazakhstan. It was a way for us to understand that jurisdiction, understand the geology a little bit more. Similarly, you'll see we've done a couple of Botswana companies in previous years. So if there's particular parts of the world that we want to learn more about, particular commodities, deposit types that we want to learn more about, or, just jurisdictions that are of particular strategic interest to BHP, we might, towards the end of the application process, look more carefully at that. But yeah, it's very much designed to get some wild cards. If you've got a cool project in a commodity that we're not playing in, there's probably a lot that we can learn from that. And so you're almost better placed in getting into the cohort with something that's a little bit different than something that's a bit more traditional, because that's the role that Explore plays for BHP in giving us that exposure.
Just out of curiosity, are there any specific metals commodities that BHP is really kind of focused on for that long-term 10, 20-year outlook that's really important for them to be a part of, that maybe comes back to the Explore program that will help them learn a little bit more on?
Yeah, look, this is going to be a very basic answer, but copper is always going to be our top priority. It's where BHP's growth
Mm-hmm.
profile sits in, and where we see, the big growth of our company. You'll always see in every year of Explore a couple of copper opportunities, but that doesn't mean there are not a number of other commodities that we're looking at with interest to make sure that we're still learning, maintaining market intelligence, and building our own internal capability in that space.
Okay. All right. Marley, thanks so much for your time. It was thorough. I probably asked you more questions than needed. A lot of people are obviously following this. I think it's been a huge success, and there's more to come with this upcoming cohort for 2026. Again, taking applications starting next week. Can you share with us, I'm sure there's a number of companies eager at the bit to give you the CV, the corporate CV. How do they go about applying?
Yeah, great. So applications open next Monday, the 8th of September. As I said, applications are assessed on a rolling basis. So the earlier you can get an application in for us, the better. And the sooner you'll hear back from us. The best thing to do is go to the BHP Explore website. So you can just Google BHP Explore. You'll see a link to the application form, and you'll see a whole range of different events, webinars, etc., that you can attend to learn a little bit more. I really suggest coming to those because we give a bunch of tips and tricks on what we're looking for in the application form. So it will give you the best chance at being competitive. And you'll also have a chance to chat to the team, test your idea, test your project, and we can sort of tell you, yep, that sounds perfect, or frame it in this way, tweak it in that way, and just give you the best opportunity and the best use of your time in doing that application form. So the BHP Explore website, type it into Google, and it should be the first thing that comes up.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Safe travels. We were just up in the mountains this weekend. The leaves have started to change, so we might get some nice fall foliage next week while in Beaver Creek. Always a lovely time of year, as long as it's not raining and not terribly cold. But I think we should have some pretty good scenery. So look forward to meeting you in person, and thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks so much, Trevor. Looking forward to catching up next week.
All right, everybody, that's a wrap here this week on Mining Stock Daily. Again, to all of you heading to Colorado, safe travels. We'll catch up with everybody. A lot of interviews next week from the conference. And we'll talk to you again later next week. Be well.